Alright, so this is the fourth section of Chapter 4 of Principles of Psychology, pages 133 to 140. The whole chapter pretty much talks about schizophrenia, the effects of genes on our behavior, and this one tends to speak specifically about twins, although it gets into other areas, but it's mainly about twins. Alright. Inferences about heritability make simplifying assumptions. Twin studies demonstrate that genes affect behavior, but not that all conclusions about heritability that come from comparing identical and non-identical twins rely on several assumptions. So in other words, there's a lot of conclusions that people draw from twin studies about heritability. Not all of it is necessarily correct because they rely on a lot of assumptions. A key factor that this section mentions is comparing environments. So whether it's the growing up or prenatal, as the next point says, the prenatal environment is more similar in identical twins than in non-identical twins. That honestly kind of makes sense, and that can have an effect on the development of the twins, as growing up environment can also have an effect on the twins. And estimates of heritability based on comparing monozygotic and dizygotic twins are going to overestimate the influence of genes, so you gotta be careful about making assumptions. Alright. Insights from cases of identical twins reared apart actually tend to be rather powerful. Adoption studies are studies of identical twins separated at birth. So, when twins resemble each other behaviorally after having been raised apart, so in other words, one was adopted by somebody and the other was adopted by somebody else, if they still behave very similarly, that suggests the shared behavior is due to shared genes. Twins raised apart are more likely to develop schizophrenia than the general population. So, is it like a very common thing? Not necessarily. However, if you're a twin and your twin develops schizophrenia, you're more likely to also develop schizophrenia than a random person from the population. There is a higher concordance rate in monozygotic twins, so the case I just mentioned is higher in monozygotic twins than in dizygotic twins. Children are likely to develop schizophrenia whether or not their parent was the schizophrenic twin. So, take two twins, one of whom is schizophrenic. One of the children is likely to develop schizophrenia, even if the child is not directly descended from the twin who had the schizophrenia, but maybe is descended from the other twin. Either way, they're still likely to develop schizophrenia. And there are important environmental influences. The role of stress. So, different kinds of stress increase probability of development of schizophrenia. So, city life is more stressful, and there's more schizophrenic people in cities than in rural areas, which suggests the influence of stress. Also, many people who return from war is of course an extremely stressful thing, and when you come back from it, you're more likely to develop schizophrenia than other people. And in at least one case, the twin who was under more stress developed schizophrenia. The point above is exemplified in certain home movies. And small stresses in early life affect later development of schizophrenia. So, in other words, if something bothers you early on in life and you're still affected by it, you are possible for schizophrenia. And abuse has a major factor. So, when children are abused, abuse is a major stressor, and abused individuals are more likely to develop schizophrenia, whether or not your twin has it. Whether or not you have a twin or not, abuse is going to affect you poorly. Genes make people susceptible to stress, so the whole relationship between abuse and, or not abuse, but between genes and schizophrenia isn't necessarily entirely due to genes, but it's more like, it's not necessarily a direct correlation, but it may just be a correlation between the fact that there's a gene that makes you susceptible to stress, and that can lead to schizophrenia. However, there is hope for treatment and or cure of schizophrenia when all is said and done. And possibly the most important section of this is the interaction between genes and environment, and how important that is, because genes highly affect how we behave. However, they are not the only. Genes control what you are made of and how you are composed, and are a huge factor in how you behave and what you do, what you make of your life. However, expression of genes changes in response to environment. There is an independence between genes and environment. The environment may invite you to act in a certain way, and may invite your genes to make you act in a certain way that you wouldn't otherwise, just based on the genes. So you put environment in a factor, and it really affects things. And the chapter and the section concludes with the question, can we make a world where individuals are finally, truly in control of their lives, no matter what genes they inherited? It's an interesting question, interesting thought. It is followed by a box, which I'm not including in this, but if you want to check it out, probably is interesting. It's on page 138. And that's a wrap. Thank you for tolerating this.